So vector databases, I think, are super powerful because they're exactly what you were talking about with transferring data between teams or embeddings as a service, right? It's the layer on top of that to manage to access the data as a service is a vector database. I love the idea of embeddings as a service, as a way of communicating between teams, because I mean, for me, the notion is like there's a lot of detail in any given data set. I never manage to understand data sets because they come by and you know, there's always a huge amount of detail. But if you can encode that information into a distance structure and everything's just generic vectors, all of a sudden you can pass that around without having to understand all the details. So you get your domain experts to build your embeddings. And now everyone can understand the data. I love that concept, and vector databases as the way to share that seems incredibly powerful. Do you know if there's much in the way in development for vector databases, Chris? Because like the indexing engines, the indexing engines, like I'm familiar with because like that's a field I work in.
Right.
But the infrastructure is the stuff that that's the hardest part.
Right. Yeah. You know, there's a lot. I think most people, or most of them, still are using HNSW and Facebook's FAISS, and then I think a little bit with Google's Scan. But you know, there's like Vespa AI, there's Weaviate, there's Pinecone, there's a ton of these that have popped up in the last few years. Many of them with very substantial like startup funding behind them. But I think for the most part, they're serving a problem which is not trying to decouple teams, but just trying to, for example, do low latency searching, which is exactly what those indexing technologies trying to do. They're not really trying to solve an organizational problem. They may as like a byproduct, but they're not trying to solve like how to decouple teams. So, but I do like the idea of like, yeah, like let the domain experts like create the features for 1,000 models, right? But that's very different than like what happens today. What happens today is like the model, that's the team that's trying to build the output, right? Like if you go to Instagram, I don't know how Instagram is set up, but like, you probably have like the friend recommender and the home feed recommender team, and they probably want to use signals from each of those surface areas. And what probably happens, what might happen, I have no idea, I don't claim to really know what's going on, but like, is that they probably take the raw signals of like this person is following this other person and clicked on their parts of their feed and like didn't engage or didn't engage with like these friend recommendations, and they're using those raw signals in opposite parts of the world. And so like that makes them brittle, because then the moment like that someone wants to change something within that team, it's going to break that feature. And then we have to go through, then there's like another like 100 like ML ops companies that are trying to like detect and change and like deal with all of those changes. But I almost kind of wonder, it's like, okay, well, maybe it's actually the model is just kind of screwed up. And it's like, actually like these domain teams should just take on as like their mandate within their domain to like, as you were saying, like export these embeddings as like, I am the domain expert. I'm the only person who can tell you that these are actually good signals. And here's what you should use as a signal within my domain. And that's a handoff. You're like, I don't care what you do with this signal, right? Like, I don't care if you're sending it off to like build better rounds or detect friends or emails or whatever. But like, and it's a very clear handoff, and it's a very, and I think it keeps experts to continue being experts in their domain. So it's got that good to it. It's got a bunch of downsides though. Like again, like as we've talked about this whole time, embeddings aren't easy to understand, right? Like today's world is like, I get a table and it has like useful columns like age in it. I know what age is, right? And I know it shouldn't be -1,000. And so like I can detect that, and I know how to intuit it quickly. And so there are downsides that like when that domain expert isn't doing their job of creating a good feature signal, that actually probably makes it harder for everybody else to like go figure out like that signal. All things which make sense. They're not rocket science, but I don't know. I get excited about a paradigm like that, and I don't know if it's real. It depends. Like it really only depends on the world where like you're living in a really large company with lots of different products, and like the value add is like, the sort of network effect of adding signals between across all those products. So is that if I were trying to start a startup, I'd have to like really bet that that was the future and that that was like an increasingly larger problem in the world, which I don't know. Maybe that's true, maybe that's not true. But yeah, I don't know. I get excited thinking about it.
My guess is that there's a lot of places where data is siloed.
Right. Yeah.
It is very common. And, point taken that, having the age field is nice and easy to interpret. But given things I've seen, there's a lot of data where the name of the field doesn't tell you anything unless you're a domain expert in that field. In fact, most of the fields make 0 sense. And it's like, I don't know. I don't understand this data. So
yeah, no, that's definitely the more default situation. That's in a table and you're like, what the hell does underscore PTR mean? Why is that in here? You're like, I don't know.
Yeah, so I think, it's hard. It takes a lot of time and effort to become a domain expert in a field. So there's the whole notion that like data science is a team sport because, it involves ideally some math and statistics, some computer programming, and some domain expertise. And in my experience, you don't actually ever find all of that in one person. That's not tractable. Ideally, you have a team of people who understand enough of the various bits that they can all communicate. But like domain expertise is vastly underrated, and managing to abstract that out to a service, like, okay, I will work to turn my domain expertise into this packaged embedding that is now, it's not perfect because nothing's ever perfect. The question of, how do you tell if an embedding is good? Well, one, you have your domain expert look through the data, look through the embedding and say, well, this all makes sense to me. But two, the question is good for what? What's your downstream task? And different embeddings are going to be good for different downstream tasks. It's unlikely you're going to magically find the one that's good for everything. But still trust a domain expert who invested time and effort to make a good generic embedding. And I can just work with that without ever having to understand the messy details of their actual individual data any day of the week, because they're the expert in that data. They will actually know what makes sense and what doesn't. And to not have to have everyone be an expert in that data, I think that's a powerful communication tool. So yeah. I think you're really onto something, and this is very much a future. I'd like to see that combined with the like multimodal embedding. Like
that was kick-ass. That was a really cool idea. I love that idea. Like,
yeah, I don't know how tractable it is yet. So don't
Leland,
like quote me on it's going to happen, but like
make it happen. So
I think it's a thing that needs to happen. Like the amount of things you can do once you can leverage a tool like that.
It literally glows like that's its own little network effect, right? Like absolutely. Exactly.